Hey everyone, it's the Nitty Professor. Recently, I heard a talk that emphasized the Artemis crew visiting the backside of the moon and how far away they got from the Earth and how inspired they were to see the big blue ball. And apparently, and I have not heard the outcome of this, but the astronauts gave some talks which I want to look up. So I'm giving you some secondhand kind of feedback from this whole idea. But I was there in 1969 on TV watching the first moon landing, and the astronauts who go all that way out there often have a very similar conviction that when you look back at the Earth, there are no borders. There are no borders. And it's just a really profound idea. And I knew it wouldn't be hard to relate that to knitting. There's Doctors Without Borders, there's Journalists Without Borders, and I think that most knitters also work without borders. There are probably exceptions, right? But for the most part, I was thinking about my own stash and even some of the garments that I've made and how they incorporate yarn made in various places. And, maybe even one skein of yarn could have wool from one place, dye from a second place, and be knit up in a third place from a pattern in a fourth place. It's a really powerful idea, in this age. And as a scholar, I've written on nationalism and nations. I've always been very skeptical of national borders personally because they've only been around for a few hundred years. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, the whole idea of nations with borders and passport controls and all this stuff is kind of a pretty radically new idea. That whole idea of, partitioning the earth. So I was really sort of touched, maybe inspired by this notion that as a knitter, I don't have to observe those borders. And so I want to look at that from a couple of different perspectives, and I'd be curious what your experience is of this phenomenon. So, for example, here I have on the one hand yarn from Portugal in my stash. On the other hand, I have yarn from Japan in my stash. In fact, I tried to knit this into socks. It's supposed to be a sock yarn, and I had a heck of a time. I think it was not my kind of socks, so I may have to make somebody a shawl. It's beautiful yarn. I love Noro. But in any case, that's from Japan. What else do we have? Yarn from Iceland. Yarn from Iceland. Still want to visit Iceland. I haven't had the chance yet. I look forward to it. Here's yarn from India. From recycled saris. Yarn from, this is Peace Fleece. I think Peace Fleece, that this is actually from Maine, but Peace Fleece as a brand, historically, their mission, as a lot of you know, has been to combine wool from disparate countries and comb it and card it and spin it together. And I think for a while there, they were doing Russian and American wool, and that was just the coolest idea. Now I think they focus on maybe Native American issues. I'm not positive. I haven't bought any Peace Fleece in a while, but this was from the store of a friend of mine that's been sitting there for a while, and I was like, I'll pick it up. Here we have yarn from Paris, so French yarn. This is from La Bien-Aimée, which I think actually the woman who owns that store is American. And, she has a yarn business in Paris. Who'd have thunk it? Here is some British wool from West Yorkshire Spinners. Got to figure out a good use for that. And here is some American wool. I was holding up the skein the other day when I was talking about color. And here we have yarn from New Zealand. I mean, these are just a few skeins. It took me literally 5 minutes to come up with these skeins from, more or less all over the world. Everywhere from New Zealand to Iceland. That's, it's pretty cool. I even whipped out this book. So this book is written by Icelandic authors. Vigdís Jónsdóttir. My pronunciation of Icelandic is abysmal. But here you have the evidence. So, we've got the author, but we've got the publisher from New York and the printing house in China. I mean, I just think, Now you might say globalization, duh. It's pretty common, right? But there's something powerful, just knowing, for example, well, here's my octopus sweater knit up with different kinds of sock yarn. And just to know that there's yarn in this sweater from Italy, Germany, the States, India, I don't know where all, to be honest, but probably at least 5 countries in this one sweater alone. Knit up here in, the backwoods of South Dakota by someone who's traveled a lot, at least in Europe. Some of you have traveled way more, but I've probably been to 20 countries. So even, personally, I'm kind of a product of internationalism. And yet, ironically, as a boot lover, I'm always emphasizing American craftsmanship and, Wolverines, they're 100% American, everything from the laces to the brass speed hooks and the sole, it's all made in the USA. So there's like a place for patriotism. But I think if I've learned anything at all from traveling, especially to small countries that have been like downtrodden a lot, is that you can be embedded in a multinational, multilingual cultural milieu and still like your home, And there are geographers who've preached about that. Heck, I've written about that in my book, Globalizing the Peasant. So I don't need to wax theoretical here. Y'all know what I'm talking about. You need a home and you need a place to call home. But when you branch outward with your thoughts and you sort of look towards other arenas for influence, inspiration, trading ideas, breathing some fresh air, it just makes life better for everyone. Here, so this yarn is mostly from South America, but the white sheep, that yarn is from China. So I know that is the case. In fact, the green yarn is from the States. So here, another sweater. 3 countries in this sweater that I knit here in one town. Had some other kind of thoughts that I just wanted to share kind of quickly. One of them is that, again, this day and age, authoritarian, a lot of those regimes are like trying to get rid of anyone who doesn't belong, to homogenize. And I just think it just doesn't work that way, In a way, we can argue that knitting and a lot of other material type activities, they are a really great rebuttal to the notion that culture has to stay in lanes. I mean, it's just, I don't even know, who came up with that? I don't know. Who came up with it? It's like fear-mongering, difference, outsiders, insiders. I suppose there's a natural place for that, but I feel like it's not really, it shouldn't be in the foreground, Strangers should be welcome. And I think in knitting communities, I feel that anyhow. I mean, I've, gone to multiple countries and gone into knitting stores, and it just seemed like there was a lot of, desired international influence, coming together of materials, patterns, ideas, people, especially in Canada, which is so cool. You could almost take, a skein of yarn, and if you think about it, like I said, some yarn may have wool from one place, dye from another place, and they might have been spun in a third place, and you can almost sort of imagine onto that skein of yarn a kind of an encoding of geography, which is kind of cool. I used to really get into stamps. I was a big stamp collector. I still have all my stamps, and I just loved that about all these little bits of paper that came from all over the world, and they were all in my albums, in my books. So it's almost like if you make something out of this yarn or out of multiple skeins of yarn, it's almost like you're wearing a wearable map of human exchange. It's a really cool idea. Patterns, thanks to the internet, patterns, influences, stitches, books, they just circulate all across the world. And they're even, like, I have a book, I didn't set it out here, but I have a book, International Hats and Mittens. And I've knit a Norwegian hat out of there, and a New Zealand hat, and a South American hat. So again, it's, it's like a global craft. The influences just come from all over, and I love that about knitting. There's something about, knitting, crochet, where that international quality, I think, is probably stronger than it would be in some other hobbies. I don't know, like gunsmithing or something, there are guns from different countries, but not to the extent of knitting, I don't think. That's my impression. I don't know. I shop with my son sometimes. He's like, I gotta buy a gun. I'm like, okay. Germany, Russia, I don't know. But in any case, knitting just strikes me, and maybe you disagree, but I would be curious. It strikes me as peculiarly international. It's almost like playing in an orchestra. The concert music can come from a lot of different countries, have a lot of different influences, especially when you get into modern music. You've got like a Mexican guy who was influenced by American jazz and used German symphonic structure. It's just really cool. Another thing that's really cool about knitting is that, in a way, it's like music. It's an international language. It's like it almost normalizes translation. The whole idea that patterns can be read by a lot of people. There are certain things that you have to translate, but when you start looking at charts, like cable charts and stuff like that, there's not a whole lot you have to translate. And I think about the books in my collection. I've got Norwegian books, I've got Danish books that I'm like, I don't care. I'll figure it out, a lot of it's universal type language. Certain kinds of yarn, certain kinds of needles, and it's like music. It works, There's also, I think, room to sort of argue that in our knitting communities and guilds and stores and that kind of thing, that we kind of mostly bypass a lot of the international tension that maybe exists in the world. That's something I celebrate in my novels. I have people from different countries coming and going, and just sort of being accepted because they have this shared love of fiber crafting. I think another thing that is cool is that when you make your own garment, and maybe you hark back, maybe you have traditions from two different countries, and they kind of come and they intertwine in what you're wearing. You're not really going to find that in the mass market fashion. There's so much sort of homogenization in fashion. How many people wear t-shirts, but this sweater, which has probably, because I used a book with motifs from a lot of different traditions, there's probably some South American, some Greek, some English, some Scandinavian, just in this sweater alone with all the motifs that I used. You're never going to find something like that in a mall, I don't think. A lot of fashion, it's just shared. H&M, Rue 21, Forever 21, you could almost just swap out some of the clothes on the racks and you wouldn't necessarily know, apart from the labels, that they came from a different store. That's my experience. A polo shirt is a polo shirt is a polo shirt. A pair of jeans, it's the same thing. But a handmade garment, it carries stories with it. It carries, it's culture, and it's not just usually one language or one sort of tradition that it comes from. It's got multiple traditions. It's a pretty cool situation. The other thing that is really nice, I like thinking about this a lot, is that when you make something like this, fiber crafting, you make it with your hands. It's like you're almost foregrounding this universal human hand. Hands are very similar all across the world. So what I do when I knit is much the same as somebody else does when they knit in Mongolia or Thailand or Russia. It's the same. It's like a universal activity, and that I find that meaningful in a way that it's deep, it's profound, it's just I feel so connected to other people regardless of where they're from, who they are, their walk of life. We share hands and the ability to make things with our hands. It's like a human attribute that connects all of us. It's I think it's just a really cool thing. Maybe as a last sort of comment, and related to the whole idea of the hand, is that knitting is something that makes labor really visible, and human labor and the agency that we get by using our brains, our minds, our muscles, our muscle memory, our body in order to, knit things, weave things, spin things, etc. It's sort of a comforting reminder that we as makers are connected to the objects that we make, and we're connected to this whole commonality that we share, just of human effort. Again, regardless of where the border is or who's on what side of it, we share that in common. So I thought it'd just be an interesting opportunity to, look at the whole question, especially in an era when immigration is demonized, and it's just so unfortunate, and in my mind, wrong. We should welcome the stranger. And if we really start to think about it, the stranger isn't really that strange. We share just a ton. We're fellow humans, and maybe that view from out in space behind the moon that the Artemis astronauts experienced is something we could just remind ourselves of as knitters when we're creating with all these yarns and all these patterns from different countries. So hope you guys have a great rest of your week. Thanks for tuning in. We'll talk soon. Ciao.